recognition that we are global, that we need to speak other languages, that we need to recognize other people's cultures and validate those cultures. All right. So cultural responsiveness is the ability to learn from and relate to people of your own culture, as well as those from other cultures. It's a huge, huge asset in the workplace because it helps our tree grow roots of empathy, acceptance, support, and equity. And I want to point out here, and I will point it out again, that equity does not equal equality. Does anyone know the difference between equity and equality and why that's important? What? Has anyone seen the cartoon? I should have put this in there where they've got, there's three people trying to look over a fence, and they all have the same height of a box that they're standing on. And the tallest person can see over the fence, and the middle person can barely, basically has their nose up here to the top of the fence, and the smallest person can't even see over the fence. And then there's another picture where they all have different size boxes so they all can see over the fence. That is an illustration of equity versus equality. Equity gives every person what he or she needs to succeed, which is not necessarily the same thing. So our job as leaders, as team builders, as educators, is to go beyond diversity trainings and cultural sensitivity and set a culture of equity, not equality, equity, and responsiveness in our workplace. It starts with us. I always say to teachers, you cannot properly put this into place for your students until you yourself have gone through the work. This is a change of mindset. This is a change of culture within your environment. And it starts from within. So we need to explore our own implicit biases and cultural identities and provide opportunities for our staff to do the same. So I began a school in 2016 called Bon Voyage World Languages Academy. This school is a nonprofit with the mission of fostering compassionate hearts and open minds through linguistic and cultural and global citizenship education. Part of the training when we bring on a new teacher at Bon Voyage is they have to go through a very intensive cultural, responsive, and global citizenship education training themselves so that they can understand the importance of teaching global citizenship and being culturally responsive in the context of teaching a foreign language to our students. And we teach K through 12 at our school. Does everyone understand what I mean by implicit biases? Is there anyone who has not heard that term before or who is not familiar with it? Everyone's okay with that term? Okay, great, because we're going to look at them a little bit later. So the next part is, once we've done the work, we build a strong cultural knowledge for all staff. That means that we ask our staff to do the same thing, to do the work, to explore their own cultural biases. And what I'm going to tell you right now is this can be hard. This can bring out some feelings. This can make you discover something about yourself or about your colleague or about somebody you work with that is not necessarily what you want to know. But it's so important because it's not until we acknowledge that we can move forward. And we have to get uncomfortable in order for our brains to grow. You know, I've been through cultural sensitivity trainings or diversity trainings that, you know, talk about the importance of diversity or validation of culture in the workplace or in the school, but they don't really get to the meat of what we need to work on. And then you go away and you just kind of go back to what was the status quo. We cannot make change unless we put in the work, and we cannot make change without getting uncomfortable. The next part is bringing in a high quality formal training on global citizenship and cultural responsiveness for your leadership team first, and then your entire staff. So making sure that when you are in a position of leadership, that you are willing to provide these high quality resources for your staff so that they can do the work as well. We want to cultivate a strong understanding of how people are connected. I think that is one thing that is sorely lacking in some of these different trainings that I've been through as a teacher over the years. And I believe that until we really show people how they're connected all over the world and how their actions will affect others directly or indirectly, we will not be able to make change. Provide opportunities for staff to share parts of their cultures in a social setting. How many of you have work socialization, like social time with work colleagues? Okay, this is important. And I know sometimes people grumble, oh, office staff party or office Christmas party or whatever. But it's really important to provide the opportunities for people that you work with to connect with each other on a social level and share part of their cultures. And I'm going to talk about how to do this a little bit later. And then lastly, but not least, set a strong example of cultural responsiveness to all staff. And if you are an educator, to all students. So you need to be the leader and set the example. We always say lead by example, right? So lead by example in this area as well. Any questions so far? Just checking in. No? Okay. Okay, so where do we start? There always has to be a starting point for this. We start with listening. Listening. It gives an opportunity to create an established relationship with every one of the staff members, every one of your students, every person that you work with. This is so important, and it has to be active listening, and it has to be true listening. We cannot just have the appearance of listening. We have to listen and follow through. That is so, so important. We need to feel like we have, in education, we call this a cognitive alliance with our students. That's the term that we use, cognitive alliance. We need to have everyone that we work with feel like we have an alliance with them and that they are heard. Because what happens if you feel like you come to somebody with something that you feel is important and you feel like they say, okay, I hear you, but you really don't feel heard? So when we listen, we need to acknowledge what they have said and acknowledge their concerns or their issues or whatever it is. We need to create a safe space where all are treated equitably. And I'm going to repeat that equity does not equal equality, does not mean equality. Equity is giving each person the tools that they need in order to be successful. And that's not always the same for every person. I repeat this over and over again. My son, my oldest son is 12 and he has autism. And I have another son who is 7 who doesn't have autism. And I'm constantly repeating this over and over and over again to my children, because what my 12-year-old needs is not always what my 7-year-old needs, and vice versa. And so I'm always telling them, it may not seem fair to you, but it is equitable. It may not seem fair, but it is equitable. And address that. You know, how many of you have had people come to you in your workplace and say, I don't understand why, no, that doesn't seem fair, or that doesn't seem right? Anybody? I get it all the time. Trust me, I do. I get it all the time in my workplace as a school administrator. I get it all the time. Not just from students. I get it from other teachers as well. It's not always fair, but it is equitable. And here is why. Because I think a lot of times explaining goes a long way. We need to go through the work, as I said, in recognition and exploration of our own implicit biases and the root cause of those. A lot of people are like, oh, this is something I feel and I can't change how I feel. I say you can change how you feel, you just don't want to, because it's uncomfortable. And so we need to go through that discomfort, as I said before, in order to grow. A change in mindset. We have to change our mindset around how we address and validate culture in our environment. Scaffolding, to give everyone what they need to be successful. Scaffolding is an education term. Scaffolding is giving the tools that everyone needs to be successful. You may have people that you work with that need different tools. I'll give you an example. We have teachers that are from Europe, and then we have teachers who are from different European countries. I'll use my French teachers as an example. We have French teachers, and then we have a couple of Chinese teachers. And sometimes our French teachers are really, really good at embracing what's new and different. And sometimes we have to give our Chinese teachers different tools so that they can be successful, because there is a difference in their education systems in the different countries. And we have a very different system at Bon Voyage. Our system of teaching goes way outside the box. And our system of teaching actually comes from France, because that's where I learned how to do it and where I was trained to do it. And so when we have teachers that are coming from these other countries, like China, we have a couple that are coming from different countries, even our American teachers, we have to give them the exact tools that they need in order to understand our methods. This is the same exact thing. You may have somebody who thinks a little bit differently or has a different view on things, and you have to understand those things, but you also have to give them those tools. A supportive environment. So we have to foster a supportive environment where all are encouraged to push beyond their comfort zones into the growth zone. And then we need to understand how the brain responds in connection with culture. Okay, next. So let's think. We're going to think about this for a minute. I'm going to ask you these questions. First of all, what is culture? What is your definition of culture? Don't be shy. What is your definition of culture? Anybody?
I can go. I was thinking about when I think of culture, I think that there's some form of community that's involved, where there are, where there's groups, or I guess communities where there are certain patterns or traditions or exercises or practices that are involved. So, and also taking or keeping into account trust within a culture.
Yeah, very good. That's a great definition of culture. Excellent. Okay, so my second question is, how does culture vary? Meaning, how do we know where culture comes from? How is it different? How do we define it? And who determines it? Those questions, those next two questions are, the next three questions are kind of connected. Who determines it? How does it vary? And how do we know? By acceptance. Okay, very good. Background, my story, very good. Okay. Diversity in beliefs and community, very good. Okay, I'm reading the chat here. Excellent. Yes. Now, I'm gonna ask you another question. Can a person belong to more than one culture? Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, a person can belong to more than one culture. So we're gonna delve into this just a little bit. All right, so there are two models of culture that are kind of out there. The first is a tree. So you've got the leaves up at the top of the tree that are like the surface culture, right? Those are things like food, language, flags, festivals, fashion, music, things that you can see. Okay, things that are obvious. Like if you go to visit another country, those things are blaring out at you, right? You can see those things. Then we've got the shallow culture. Okay, this is a little bit deeper. And that's like facial expressions, gestures, eye contact, communication styles, the way that you say things. So like, for example, if you see a French person do this, do you know what that means? Anybody know what that means? No? Anybody? Okay, so if you see a French person do this, do you know what that means? This means you're lying. It means mon oeil. It means you're lying. This means like whatever. Ooh. But those things are a little bit deeper. Those things can be learned by immersing yourself a little bit more, but they are, they're still, kind of obvious. Like if you see a person doing that, or you body language or different types of things like that, those can be learned. And then your deep culture or your root culture are those really deep belief systems that come out of being part of a culture. So this would be like your attitudes towards elders, towards teenagers, expectations, attitude towards work, religion, marriage, raising children, problem solving, things like that. How you feel about, you know, how you feel about different things, fairness, justice, things like that. Okay. And so these are the two models. There's the tree, and then there's the iceberg. Okay, so these are two very well-known models. I have added a third because basically, and I'll talk about that in just a second, but basically the idea is that these root cultures or deep cultures, they cannot be changed. They are intrinsic within you. They cannot be changed. Sometimes you don't even think about them. Sometimes you don't even know that they are part of you until you are faced with them, right? So that's the belief, is that these things cannot change. My model is the ocean. Okay, so think about the ocean. First of all, has anybody here traveled abroad or visited another culture? If you have, give me a thumbs up. Okay, great. Awesome. Okay. So when you go visit another culture, a lot of times you're on the surface, right? I think about when I do a lot of travel programs through my education company called Language with the Five Senses. We do several different travel programs throughout the year. And one of the main differences between our travel programs and a lot of those programs that are out there for students, at least, is that we take an immersive approach. So that means that our students are not just going over, getting on a bus, seeing sights, getting off a bus, and not interacting with the culture. Our travel programs get the people, the participants, because it's not always students. We do a lot of different programs, but get them into the culture, down with the people, you know, in the host families, in with, you know, just interacting and learning language and all of that. So when you go, normally when a person goes to another culture, they're visiting, they're on the surface, they're swimming along the surface, right? And in the ocean, there's only so much you can see when you put your face down in the water, right? So we have that surface culture. Now, if you dive a little deeper, say you decide to go snorkeling, and you dive a little deeper. So here's my little Bitmoji snorkeling. You can see some beautiful things, right? You learn a little bit more about the culture. You get a little bit more immersed. You can learn some of those mid-level cultural things, right? Like I said, the communication styles and the different things that are just a little bit deeper. But if you scuba dive, you get yourself right down in there and you start to learn about things that are different from you, but you also learn to recognize what is similar. Now, when you learn about something new, you have the opportunity to embrace it and be open to it and have it change your view. Just like if you scuba dive in the ocean, you are going to change what you see from the surface to snorkeling to scuba diving. The other reason why I like to use the ocean is because the ocean, water doesn't stay in one place, right? Think about if you throw, I mean, there's this analogy, if you throw a bottle into the ocean with a message in it, it's going to travel, right? And think of all the places it could go. So the ocean has a flowing water that visits different places, okay? Whereas it's not static. Just like people are not static. It's so funny because we, as in the bilingual community, we talk about how our language changes when we move to a different culture, and how we adapt words that fit the situation, and the word that fits isn't necessarily in the language of the culture that we're living in. And so this can happen with culture as well. You know, when we learn to see things through new eyes, we can change that deep culture within us, or we can add to it. Has anyone had an immersive experience? If you have, put a thumbs up. An immersive experience in another culture, meaning you've gone and lived in a different country, or you've been immersed for a period of time. Anyone? Oh, Kelly, yes. Okay, Kelly, can you tell me what culture you were in? If you don't mind sharing. And Tanya, you can write it in the chat if you want to, or you can share.
So mine wasn't vastly different than the U.S. I studied in the UK for a semester. And then at the end of that semester, we traveled around the continent. So it was very touristy on the continent.
But the UK, that's still, I mean, that's still a different culture than here. I mean, there's a lot of things that are different in the UK for sure. Awesome. Anyone else want to share?
I was married to a Puerto Rican.
Okay.
For about 14 years, and his parents knew very little English. When I first met him or met them, we were both in the Air Force, and so traveled to Rhode Island. And his father was a Pentecostal minister, and everything was in Spanish.
Oh, wow.
So I had no idea. They just kept standing up, sitting down, standing up, sitting down. And, you know, and just like I said, that the next 14 years were just an immersion.
Wow, that's amazing. That's a great experience. That's a great example, because, you know, you really got to be there and in that as well. So that's awesome. And either of you that shared, did you, oh, I'm from Colombia and married to an American from Pennsylvania. Okay, so anybody who has been through an immersive experience, did you feel the shift in your ideals or beliefs or anything like that in that deep culture? Or have a shift in ideas at all? Maybe. Maybe.
All right. I am the one that I'm from Colombia, married with an American from Pennsylvania. And honestly, I believe it's about being open to different ideas and teaching other people how to be open to my ideas, my culture. And I'm not trying to impose my culture to anyone, but I always encourage people to respect the same way I respect another culture.
Yeah, so I think that's a great point, right? So it can bring us to an openness. You know, you don't always have to agree or really understand, but I think being able to interact with that deep culture brings us to an openness and an understanding and a mutual respect. And I think that is very, very important. Cynthia wrote, I had a shift living for several years in New Orleans, even though I'm from Colorado, totally different culture and many more international residents in New Orleans speaking several languages. That is true. And in fact, I used to be of the belief that, you know, all Americans were the same, you know, and this is me, this was my the French side of me. All Americans are the same. There's not different cultures within the US, but I travel a lot around the US to give these types of talks. And my husband is from Texas. And the first time, I'm from Washington State, I'm from Seattle, okay? Any Pacific Northwesterners here? Give me a thumbs up if you're from the PNW here. No? Okay, So I'm from Seattle, and even like now I live in Eastern Washington. Even between Seattle and Eastern Washington, there's a huge difference. But I realized what a difference there was when I first went to Texas with my husband. We went to New Orleans several years ago. I was speaking at the National World Language Teacher Conference there in New Orleans, and we went there, and I was blown away at the difference in culture between the Pacific Northwest. And even linguistically, like the difference between East Coast and West Coast. I mean, there's a whole lot of culture even within our borders here. I've got some other people sharing. B says, similar to Cynthia, I moved from Arizona to Virginia. Number one question I was asked, what country are you from? You know, that's so funny because I oftentimes get asked if I'm from Canada, because our accent, I guess, here in Washington is very similar to British Columbia. So I've gotten asked that quite a bit. My friend Lula was born in the USA, but his parents are from Peru and his mother barely speaks English. So it was a big learning experience from talking with her and his father. I always love visiting them because it is so different from my own. I also make a diverse comic series about mythology. We actually talk to people from those countries to make sure we get what they want us to tell our readers. That's amazing. That's awesome. I would love to read your comic series, Kara. I think that would be awesome. And Tanya said, I'm from Southern Illinois and I lived in Texas for 18 years. That is a whole different culture in itself. Yes, I always like to joke with my husband that he is from the country of Texas. But yeah, so yeah, that's amazing. Like, I love hearing about all of your experiences and all of your stories. And it just goes to show that there are many that culture varies. You know, culture varies between generations even. I mean, I started teaching when I was 22, and I was teaching elementary at first, and then I moved to teaching high school. And when I started teaching high school, I was 24. So I was, you know, my oldest student was 18. So I wasn't that much older than the students I was teaching at that time. And as I got older, I am very far from being 24 now, let me tell you. I started to lose some of the lingo that they were using, you know, that teenagers use. And I was on one of our immersion trips in 2018 with a group of students, and they were talking about somebody was throwing shade at somebody else. And I did not know what that meant. And I was like, man, when did I become so uncool? So I had to go and immerse myself in the teenager culture so that I could relate to my students a little better. I mean, so there are varying degrees of culture and how it varies. I'm going to talk to you now about individualist versus collectivist culture. Has anyone heard of the individualism versus the collectivism continuum? Have they heard of that? No? Okay. So the individualism versus collectivism continuum is a 100 point scale. Okay. The highest number on the scale, there's a whole bunch of different criteria that it goes through and to determine if a culture is highly, or a country is highly individualist or highly collectivist. Okay. So the USA, and this does not surprise me, scored the highest in the whole world on this scale, and at 91 points, making it highly individualist. Whereas Guatemala scored the lowest on this scale with 6 points. So individualist cultures are focused on the individual, independence, and individual achievement. Think about it. If you think about the definition of the American dream. It is you pull yourself up by your bootstraps and you do whatever you can to make something of yourself, right? You do for yourself. And you make sure that you do the work. It emphasizes your self-reliance and the belief that you can only rely on yourself to make progress and to get ahead. So individual contributions are more important than the contributions made as a team or a collective. It's not very interactive. It's highly, highly competitive. We see that a lot with student testing, which I'm 100% against. I am 100% against standardized testing of our students. But we can talk about that more later. I could go off for hours on that, which I won't. And it's also, we see it a lot in sports for kids. And it's not necessarily mindful of how individual actions affect the collective. Okay, so we've been seeing a lot of this lately in the US. And does anybody know in what way we've been seeing it? And certain states are more individualist than others, but anybody have an idea of where we've been seeing this, especially just in our society in general lately? Mask wearing. Excellent. Very good, Cynthia. Yes. I'm not going to wear a mask because I don't want to. And that's just the way it is. Collectivist cultures are focused on both independence and group success. So they foster the individual, but they also recognize that we are interconnected in this world. We are interconnected with the people that are around us, and we need to work together. Emphasis on reliance and collective wisdom and resources, and that all must take care of each other in order to get ahead. So not only with things like mask wearing, but also like they are a lot of times more collaborative in the work environment or in the school environment. Learning happens through interaction. So I truly believe this as an educator, that you cannot, I mean, you can learn on your own, but interaction and interacting with not only the content, but with other people and bouncing off ideas, you know, is very, very useful and sometimes essential. It thinks of oneself as a member of the collective whose individual actions affect others. Okay, I don't live in a bubble. I live with other people in this society, and what I do affects other people, whether I know it or realize it or not. Highly collaborative and relational, and a team player. So I always tell this story. I was way long time ago, I was going through a training for educators, and this story was told. So this is not my own story, but I always share it anyway. There was a teacher, and she had a group of students, and she told the students to all sit down and work individually on an assignment, a math assignment at their desks. And she was going to sit at her desk and work on something. And all of a sudden, she looks up, and this happened in the United States. So let me, and she had students from she had students from the US, she had students from South America, she had students from, you know, all over the place. She had a very diverse group of students. And so all of a sudden she looks up, and these two girls are talking to each other. That they sit next to each other and they're talking to each other. And these two girls both of them are from different countries in South America. Their parents are, they were not born in the US. Their parents came to the US. They were working in the US, and they were talking to each other. So I always ask, first of all, what do you think the teacher assumed they were doing? Anyone have an idea?
Cheating? Did you
Cheating.
think they were cheating?
Cheating or fooling around or just talking to each other. What were they actually doing? They were working together because they were from a culture where working together is better because they needed to help each other. And so I always share this because you can't always assume in a classroom setting, you can't always assume that two students are cheating or off task or whatever. They may be working together. Cynthia said our individualist culture can be toxic, as has happened recently. It can, that's for sure. Yeah, it can for sure. Okay, so how do we take this little tidbit of information about individualism and collectivism and put it into the workplace? Okay, so highly collectivist cultures come from Asia, South America, and Africa, and especially Southeast Asia. Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, those countries are highly collectivist. Okay. Africa is has a lot of very collectivist cultures. South America has a lot of very collectivist cultures. Social rules promote selflessness. So their social rules, their deep culture, and what's acceptable social in the social setting is that they think of others before they think of themselves. And the family unit is central to everything. So they are very family oriented, family first, especially in South America. Relationships tend to be formed based on family or community. So in these cultures, it's rare to form relationships based on quote unquote choice. They build strong bonds with their family, and they form strong bonds with those who are in community with them. There's other communities that are like this, certain religious communities. For example, I live in a very Mormon area of Washington State, and they tend to be very family oriented and in very much in community with themselves. So they have very strong relationships based on their communities. So they're a little less likely to bond with new people or strangers. This is true of French culture too. And so it can be hard to break through that as an outsider, quote unquote outsider. It can be done when you understand, however. They tend to be largely emphasizing a common goal rather than individual pursuits. So what can I do that is good for my community, for the people I'm working with? They tend to be more formal in a work environment. This is especially true in France. They're very formal in the French work environment. It can be a little bit difficult. When I go to work in France 2 to 3 times a year, and it's definitely a shift of mindset when I have to go there to work. Cynthia, I don't know where you are, but that looks glorious. I just have to say that. I'm sorry. Whatever is in your background.
It's a virtual background. I'm pretty sure it's the Mediterranean or Greece or something.
Oh my gosh, I was gonna say, can I sit there too? They tend, working as a group or a team is essential, and they're more likely to conform than stand out. Even if they have a different idea about how things should be, they're less likely to speak up, especially in those Asian cultures in like Southeast Asia. Those cultures are what they call honor shame. So for example, a person from Southeast Asia would rather not come to work if they're going to be late, because being late would bring a shame upon that person themselves or their families. And they believe that the most important thing that a person has is their reputation. So just the basic understanding of things from these cultures can go a long way when you are dealing with people from different cultures in your work environment. So sometimes we have to change the way that we communicate with those from collectivist cultures. Because maintaining harmony is of utmost importance. They don't tend to be, now, I would say that French people are kind of on the cusp of being individualist, but also collectivist. So I'll tell you one thing about French people. We tell you what we think. We don't care about maintaining harmony so much as telling you what we think. So in that way, we are kind of individualist. And in some ways, Americans in their communication in that sense are collectivist, because we don't tend to want to disagree with someone because we feel like it's going to cause a fight. Whereas in French culture, they say, I'll disagree with you, even if I actually agree with you, because I like to argue. That's the truth. So sometimes we need to take a look at the individual culture itself. But in some of these countries, such as South America, such as Africa, such as those Southeast Asian countries, maintaining harmony is the most important. You don't disagree because you don't want to bring discord. So they may not even speak up if they have an idea or disagree. And so in this case, you know, in our dominant culture, if we have an idea or we want to disagree, we need to say, okay, it's all right. Let's talk about this. Indirect communication, they tend to imply meaning rather than saying exactly what they mean, which can seem in our American culture as passive aggressive sometimes. And it's not meant to be. They tend to avoid conflict or embarrassment, anything that would bring, especially in those honor shame cultures, anything that would bring shame upon themselves or their families. They may seem evasive or, like I said, passive aggressive to somebody from an individualist culture, and they tend to see direct statements as rude. Which we tend to, in America, see direct statements as rude as well, a lot of times. And then a lot of times people fall somewhere in the middle of the spectrum, or not quite as extreme as Guatemala or the US. We kind of fall somewhere in the middle. And, you know, you always have individuals who have lived in other countries that, you know, have taken on some of these different identities from where they have been. Any questions so far? I feel like I'm moving through this, and I don't want to miss anyone's questions. All right, so when we're designing our culturally responsive workplaces, I just want to kind of go over what we've talked about, since I've gone through a lot of things. We really start by listening, really, really listening, active listening. Relationships, trusting relationships, release oxytocin and dopamine from the hypothalamus of the brain. Does anyone know what oxytocin and dopamine are? So a lot of times oxytocin is related, like we think about it in terms of childbirth. It's what makes women go into labor, but it's basically the bonding hormone, okay? So when you have a release of oxytocin, it means that you are bonding with a person. The other hormone that I mentioned was dopamine. And a lot of times people think about dopamine in the negative context of addiction. Dopamine is the feel-good hormone. So when you feel good, when something makes you feel good, you're releasing dopamine. So oxytocin and dopamine together create trust when it's put in the context of relationships and forming bonds with other people. So a relationship building, and I truly believe this, relationship building should be just as important or more important than the actual work you're doing. And I say this in classrooms, it needs to be more important or just as important as the content, because you're gonna get better output when people you work with can trust you and when your students can trust you. So you making time to hear what everyone has to say on a regular basis. When I was teaching in the classroom, even with my elementary students, we did weekly meetings. Now, a lot of times in the workplace, we think about meetings as, oh, this is another meeting that could have been an email, right? But when we are doing it right, when we are making the time to get input and validate and make sure that everyone is heard, it can make a world of difference. We want everyone's input and we want to treat everyone as a partner. The next thing is create bonding opportunities, have guided discussions, sharing stories. Give everyone a chance to share stories. Here's what happens when you tell a story. It's amazing what happens to the brain. So I'm telling you a story. And as I'm telling you a story, you're getting engaged in the story, and your brain, which is magical. I mean, the brain is magical. I do a whole talk on the brain, and because I love it so much, I think it's so amazing, our brain. So your brain is actually mimicking and doing the same thing that my brain is. So your brain and my brain are in sync as I'm telling you a story. And that releases dopamine and oxytocin, which creates trust. And this is like a story. This is not only story. This is why they say that, you know, when you read to children, it's so important. Literacy for children, reading to children, telling personal stories, all of that is so important for bonding because it makes the brain mimic whoever is telling the story. Sharing a communal meal or cooking together. You know, even if it's lunch once a month and you have, you know, a lunch from a different country once a month or from a different culture, or you bring in food. It's really important to do this. And, you know, I did this with my students. In fact, we did it online, because cooking together online, we got online and on Zoom and we cooked together. I had a teacher that I was coaching a couple of years ago who did an entire thing. She was in, she had her fourth graders, and she created a formal meal, and she had the school kitchen make this meal, and she had the string ensemble from the high school come and play, and the students sat down and they learned manners, and they ate together and they shared. What an incredible opportunity to make this multicultural, to have volunteers from wherever you are create a lunch where you learn the practices. You know, some places, like I said, we're going to Senegal, and you know, I'm teaching my kids right now the practices for eating and polite talk and all of that, which are so different from European culture that they're used to, or American culture that they're used to. What a great opportunity. Showing genuine concern for someone who is struggling personally or has a family struggle. You know, I'm here for you goes a long way. Please let me know what I can do to help you. That goes a long way. And telling jokes. Telling jokes. Laughing produces endorphins. Laughing produces oxytocin and dopamine. When I taught, we used to have Friday funnies. And my students, whoever wanted to get up and tell a joke, it would have to be an appropriate joke, but they could get up and tell a joke, or even just walking over to a colleague and telling an appropriate joke. Now I say appropriate, okay, because, you know, some workplaces can have some jokes, you know, with adults that aren't super appropriate, but like, I don't know, like I would tell my colleagues jokes all the time, or I tell my teachers jokes, and I heard the joke, this one joke, what do you call cheese that is not yours? Nacho cheese, you know, silly jokes like that, where people are like, oh my gosh, that is so cheesy. Or like my kids tell me jokes and then I'll tell it to my students or our staff. Or there's a candy called a carambar in France. And when you open it up, it's jokes written by kids. Like a lot of times I'll share those little jokes with our staff, and then they pass it on to the students. So that's really fun to do. Share stories about you and your own life with your colleagues, you know, let them in a little bit. Like I said, humans are wired for stories as a way of connection, and our brains know that. That's why our brains will mimic what a storyteller's brain is doing. And then create those cognitive alliances. Like I said, even in the workplace, you know, at the school level, we tend to do a testing scoring relationship. How many of you are in charge where you have to do performance evaluations? Anybody? I have to do performance evaluations at my school. If you have to do performance evaluations, you know, think about it as an alliance. Think about it as a partnership. You know, bring them into that discussion, talk with them and not about them, and involve them in conversation. I like to use rubrics and lists for everything. Even for my performance evaluations, I use rubrics and lists. So that is a way that, you know, we're in education, and so that kind of fits in well, but rubrics and lists are great because then people know exactly what to expect. It's clear and it starts a conversation. And then we affirm and validate in ways that speaks to a person's culture. You leave notes of affirmation for individuals, you know, like maybe somebody did a really great job on something. I leave post-it notes, you know, I'll send post-it notes on kids' desks, or post-it notes to my staff, or I send them little emails. You know, I watched your lesson the other day. I thought this was awesome. Great job. Post words in a native language around your workplace, or try to greet a person in their native language. It's not hard to learn how to say hello or thank you. You know, I do my best. I always say I speak 1 1/4 languages. So I speak, or sorry, 2 1/4 languages. I speak English and French as completely bilingual. And then I speak enough Spanish to get myself in trouble. That's what I always say. And a little bit of Italian to get myself in trouble. And I always try to greet my teachers when I'm talking with them in their native language. I'll even if it's bad, I mean, really broken Spanish, I find that they appreciate that. And they try to do the same for me in French. So, you know, just little things like that. Create opportunities for colleagues and staff to share their own stories. And then don't discount high fives, fist bumps, pats on the back, things like that. You know, that might seem a little childish or whatever, but you know, it really makes a difference because it releases dopamine and oxytocin. And then last year we used the WISE educator feedback model instead of the sandwich model. Okay, so you know the sandwich model is like, this is what you did well, this is what you need to fix, and then some kind of encouraging words. Whereas the WISE educator feedback model is both of you coming in and having a discussion and not really padding it with the two, you know, I have to teach the sandwich model to my teachers because a lot of times it's not used in a lot of other countries, but I have to teach the sandwich model to my teachers when they're corresponding with American parents. Because a lot of times they'll just get right into it and the parents will be like, whoa, wait a second. So I have to teach that to them. But in this case, I think the wise educator model is a great model for feedback. Any questions? Okay, so this was sent out. There's a packet called Our Cultural Selves. With the remaining time that we have, which is about 30 minutes, we're going to kind of go through and do some of the lesson that I teach when I'm doing these trainings, these formal trainings for different organizations. And so if you have this, please go ahead and get it out. I will project it onto the screen, but I'm going to start out by reading everyone a story because stories are very important. And as I said, this is a story. And I read this to everyone and you might say, oh, this is very teachery. Yes, it is. I agree. It's very teachery, but we're going to read this story. And this is a story that I read to everyone. I think it's really important. It's called What Does It Mean to Be Global? And I have this in 3 different languages. I have in French, Spanish, and English. So this story comes in a lot of different languages. If you want to find it, it's on Amazon. Okay. So what, can everybody see that, by the way? Can you see the, yeah? I lost my chat box. Where did it go? There we go. Okay. All right, cool. All right. Here we go. What does it mean to be global? Does it mean having a globe? No. Does it mean studying planets? No. Does it mean being round? No. Being global means being curious about other parts of the world. Recognizing that your language is just one of thousands spoken on Earth. Listening to all different kinds of music. Traveling to places near and far. And appreciating how special they are. Trying all types of food. Experiencing other traditions. Learning about other religions. And respecting that others may have different values than you do. Celebrating diversity in people. And understanding how your actions affect another person's experience. Living respectfully and peacefully with one another. Opening your mind to new possibilities. Being global means being a citizen of the world. It means knowing that citizens are members of a community. Cultures are communities that share values, beliefs, and customs. Values are what people consider important. Diversity means differences. Traditions are beliefs and customs that parents teach their children. The community is a group of people with common interests. So let's do whatever we can to be global, and let's spread the word. If we can all be global, our world will be even more interesting and exciting. So this book, I think, has a very strong message, and I always start cultural responsiveness and global citizenship trainings with it, because it shows that we need to adapt to our increasingly global world. So this is a book that, like I said, that I use. I have it in several different languages, and I use it with all of my audiences, no matter what, because you know what? Sometimes even adults need this message, right? Simply put, very simply put, they need this message. And so I love to use that, that to start with. We're going to start out with this packet. I'm going to share my iPad screen with you. Okay. Give me 1 second. Here we go. All right. Everybody see this? So this is the packet that I had sent out. And what I want to know from you, we're going to look at stereotypes first. So I always like to start and talking about global citizenship and where our ideas come from with some stereotypes. And this can be triggering for some people, but stereotypes come from a place. They always have a certain amount of truth to them, enough truth that they've come about. But then we talk about how we can explain them. So I would like to know, let's just start out with what are some stereotypes of the French, for example? Shout them out there or put them in your chat box.
They're rude.
Okay, rude. What else?
Don't like Americans.
Okay, they don't like Americans. What about people from Asia?
Good at math.
Good at math. Okay.
Overall smart.
Okay.
Right.
What about people from Africa? I'll give you one that I hear a lot when people ask me, because I do a travel talk as well, and people are like, and one of the things that we talk about is two things: poor and dangerous. And I talk about how poor does not equal dangerous, and it's not necessarily poor. Underdeveloped.
I was going to say close-knit community.
Okay. So yeah, so stereotypes can be good or bad, right? Okay, now let's go with Americans. What can we say about Americans?
Individualistic.
Sorry?
Yeah.
Individualistic. Okay. What else?
That's
Arrogant.
Yeah,
Arrogant.
I've heard that. Yeah. Or rude.
I hear loud a lot. I hear fat a lot, right? Stubborn. Okay. All right. So let's talk about these. I'm going to take the rude comment, the rude stereotype about the French people, and that they don't like Americans. Let's start with that. A lot of times, stereotypes are cultural misunderstanding or ignorance. And what is ignorance? Ignorance does not equal stupidity, right? Ignorance is the lack of knowing. That's all it is. Ignorance is only a lack of education. And so the only way out of ignorance is education, right? So a lot of times stereotypes are, like I said, brought up by cultural misunderstanding or ignorance, flat out ignorance. So rude. French people are rude. They're not rude. They're direct. And a lot of times, we talked about this earlier, a French person will argue with you because they like to argue, even if they agree with you. I'm like that. I am totally like that. I love to argue. I'm very direct. And a lot of times Americans don't like that. They can't take it from me. They don't want me to say what I think. A French person, if you say, the best example I have for this is you buy a new dress or you get your hair done, right? And you say, oh, do you like my dress? And the person hates your dress, thinks it's ugly on you, thinks it doesn't look good on you. What's the American person gonna say?
It's a pretty color.
Oh yeah, and they find something positive about it. Or no, it looks great. The French person will be like, I think that's ugly. It doesn't fit you well. It's a terrible color. They'll tell you exactly what they think of it. And so for a French person, it is rude to not tell it like it is, right? It's rude to, kind of beat around the bush and lie per se, not lie, but, kind of give a half truth. That's rude. So that's kind of a difference. Don't like Americans. They actually, French people like Americans significantly more than they like the British. It's true. What they don't like is the fact that we are loud. That, we go into a restaurant and they're loud. We do have a very loud culture. And so that comes from, that comes from a truth. But are we always, and that, they feel like we don't really know how to communicate across cultures. That's kind of what they feel, but they don't dislike Americans, in fact. Let's talk about Africa. Poor, dangerous, underdeveloped. Not all places in Africa are poor. Not all places in Africa are dangerous, and not all places in Africa are underdeveloped. Let's take Senegal, for example. That is a country that is quite well developed. It has real roads, which I've had people ask me if in France they have real roads. Not joking. And, close-knit community. Yes, they are collectivist, very much so. When greeting somebody in Senegal, you need to ask them about their family and about themselves, and, ask them all sorts of questions before you talk about any type of anything else, before you get down to business. Let's talk about Americans. Yes, we are individuals. Arrogant. I don't know if it's so much arrogance, but it's seen that way around the world, isn't it? I don't know if it's so much arrogance or the fact that we just need a change of mindset sometimes. And then people from Asia, they're smart, they're good at math. I think there are elements of truth to that, but is everybody the same? That's the thing. Not every person is the same. So, stereotypes can be dangerous because it really, it gives us an excuse not to really get to know an individual person because of the stereotypes. The next page, we don't have time to do this today, but if you want to watch this TEDx talk, it's really, really amazing. Christopher Gilmore talks a lot about, we fear what is unknown. And so the best way to remove ourselves from fear is to learn and to move beyond ignorance. And I think it's a very good TED Talk to watch. So I highly encourage you to watch that. Now we're going to talk about cultural identity. And cultural identity, I do this in two different exercises. The first one is this one. It is the identity of belonging to a group. It is related to nationality, ethnicity, religion, social class, generation, locality, or any other type of social group that has its own distinct culture. So every person in this world has at least one cultural identity. Some of us have multiple cultural identities, and this is the way that we start to do the work to flesh out what our cultural identity is, where our ideas came from, where we got our implicit biases. So I'm going to ask you to explore and take a minute. We don't have a lot of time left. So we're not going to get through this whole packet completely, but take a minute and look through, and I'll give you some examples from this. So for example, my name is Elizabeth. So go ahead and put your name there in the middle. And we're going to talk about the different cultural identities that make up your entire identity. So you're not just one thing or one idea, you're a multitude, right? So for example, in education, I might put things like went to school, went to college outside the US. So you can be filling this in as I'm filling mine in, or I have a master's degree. I have a master's in education. I have a bachelor's in Bachelor of Arts in French and Linguistics and Applied Linguistics. Okay, so this is all the things that, you know, that kind of make up your identity. Birth order and family. I have a younger brother. I'm the oldest. And I have been told that I can't break you out further into more breakout groups, but normally we would do this in groups. Yes, Tanya, it was sent out before, but I will make sure that everybody gets one. Yeah. It was supposed to have been sent to you before this, but yeah.
It's in the chat room. If you go to the chat room, Melissa put the link there. If you go to the very top of the chat room, that's where I got mine.
So I'm the oldest child. Thank you very much for putting that. I'm the oldest child. I was raised by married parents. Okay. My religion, I was Catholic. I identify as Catholic, but I'm open to other religions. Socioeconomic status, I would say middle upper class. Okay, age. There, I just gave you my age. Gender. So this could be your gender. This could be your gender identity. I was what they say, assigned female at birth. I am female. But this could be, you know, gender identity, race and ethnicity. I'm a white, French. Okay, so race and ethnicity are not exactly the same thing. I oftentimes get a question about what's the difference between Black and African American, and you know, different ethnicities in that case. My understanding is that not all Black people are African American, and not all Africans are Black. So that's the explanation that has been given to me from a friend of mine who is an expert on this. Not all white people are European in origin. Languages you speak, I speak French, I speak English, and you know, honestly, I am a different person. I have a different personality in the languages that I speak. There is French Elizabeth and there is English speaking American Elizabeth. So my cultural identity depends definitely on which language I'm speaking. And that's very true. If you are a bilingual person, if anyone here is bilingual, I'm sure that you can identify with the fact that you are a little different in one language than you are in the other language. Most memorable experience, I have a lot of them. That's a lot. So job or career, I'm an educator. Educators tend to be in a cultural identity. Favorite things. Oh my goodness. Well, let's see. My favorite things. Oops. Tells you a lot about my culture. Starbucks. American Elizabeth loves Starbucks. French Elizabeth will not go to Starbucks outside the US, but American Elizabeth is from Seattle and loves, loves, loves Starbucks. Foxes, The Little Prince is my favorite book. So you can put all sorts of things here. And then nationality. Okay, so I have an American nationality. So your nationality isn't, and your citizenship isn't necessarily your cultural identity or your culture. So this is a way of analyzing and thinking about where your identity comes from. And then there's then we're going to think about this further, where it says, which identities do you think about most often? Well, for me, color those in red. For me, it would be my languages. That's very, very important to me. And my job. Oops, I didn't mean to erase that. My job and my education. Those three things are extremely, extremely important to me. I value them greatly. And then which identities have the strongest effect on how you perceive yourself? Well, I would say it's about the same. And I would add in probably my favorite things as well, because my favorite things are shaped by what by, you know, how I think about things. So this is a way for you to go through and kind of analyze and think about where things come from. And then on this page, I just have people, you know, write a little bit of an analysis after we've gone through this completely. This next exercise that I do, and like I said, we've got about 5 minutes left, and I wanted to take way more time. Oh, thank you, Kara. I wanted to take more time, but this is, you're gonna on the inside write or draw pictures of things that illustrate who you are from the inside. So this might be things that you like, that you've experienced. You could be like, for example, I'm stubborn. I'm generous. I like to eat chocolate. I like chocolate. Okay. My dog is barking upstairs. I'm sorry. The fun of working from home, right? And then things from the outside, like for example, I'm an older sister. I lived in France. Oh, somebody's at the door. And the point of this exercise is to see how this from the outside influences the inside and vice versa. So when we come to the realization is that everything that we experience on the outside affects how we feel on the inside. And like I said, vice versa, how we feel about something might affect how we react or how we interact with something on the outside. I do this with people who are going on our travel programs. And what I do is I have them do a before, and I have them do it in one color. And then I have them look at it after. And I have them add or change to see what has grown within them when they've had this experience. And it's powerful. It's very powerful. A lot of times things change a lot. Sometimes they change very little, but a lot of times they change a lot. Uh-oh, our breakout rooms are closing in 115 seconds. Okay. So the next one is a TED Talk, another TED Talk that's amazing. I really, really recommend it. And if you would like to watch my TED Talk, you can visit my website at lw5steachers.com. I have some other talks on there. I want to thank everyone so much for having me here today and listening to me talk about culture. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. I'm happy to interact with you and chat with you. We've got 1 minute left. Any remaining questions before they kick us out of the breakout room? Thank you, Kara. I appreciate it. I'm definitely going to check out. In fact, I'm clicking on your thing now before I lose it, so I can look at it after. 52 seconds. Thank you. Thank you. I'm so glad. I managed to hit record a little bit late, but not super late into the presentation. So like I said, I had a lot of fun with all of you today. Thank you for having me. If you have any questions, they're going to kick us out. Anyone? Well, thank you so much, everybody. I really enjoyed it. Have a wonderful afternoon or morning if you're on the West Coast like I am. People are starting to pop out here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
All right, guys, welcome back. Already got some good feedback on both breakouts. Had a couple of emails and the direct message sending me, letting me know that the breakouts were really enjoyable. So I'm really glad to hear that. Thank you guys for participating and just being awesome overall. Thank you to our presenters. I really am just so excited to have all of you with us today. You know, having both of those presentations, just especially the coming at it from the mindfulness side of it, and as well as, you know, the cultural competencies, really enjoyed not only your expertise, but, you know, being those subject matter experts in those areas. Just phenomenal to have women represented so well. So it's break time. Super exciting. Definitely take a moment, get what